So if you don't mind, I think we'll start with our first speaker of the evening, and that's the Ambassador Yovanovitch. Ambassador Maria Yovanovitch is a career member of the United States Senior Foreign Service with a distinguished record of diplomatic service. She was confirmed by the U.S. Senate in 2008 to serve as the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the United States of America to the Armenian Republic. She has served as ambassador in very many important posts in a variety of countries. If you don't mind starting us off today.
Well, first of all, good evening, everybody. I'm really glad to be here tonight. Public service is, I'm not exactly sure what the textbook definition of public service is, but I define it very, very broadly. I define it as people who work, whether they're paid or unpaid, but people who work to benefit others. And so that can be volunteering at your local orphanage or in a hospital. It can be tutoring in a school. It can mean actually being a paid teacher at a school. People who again, do things that benefit others. And it can also mean working for the government, in my case, the U.S. government. And the reason I kind of went into government is, there were a number of reasons that I decided to choose the career path that I chose. But one of the reasons is that I kind of followed my parents' example. My parents were always volunteering. If there was something that needed to be done at the church, my parents were there. If they were both teachers, so education very important to them. And they were always volunteering at my school, even though that's not where they taught, and trying to generally help in the neighborhood in the little town that we grew up in. It was, their work was on a relatively modest scale, but it was important to our community. It made a difference to the families in our neighborhood and in our town. So, I guess the first most important thing was watching my parents' example, and that's why I think that all of you have such a big responsibility, because people are looking to you to see what you're doing, and they're going to follow that good example or perhaps that bad example. So each one of us has a very large responsibility in that respect, I think, to set a good example in terms of trying to be a part of the solution rather than a part of the problem, and sitting around waiting, wondering when the mayor is going to fix a problem instead of sort of organizing people to actually find the solution to that particular problem. When I was 17, I went to university. I went to Princeton University, and at that time, Princeton's motto was Princeton in the Nation's Service. And from day one, Ralph Nader, who some of you may know as a candidate for president in the United States, at that time he had not yet started that political career, and he was a consumer advocate from the early 1960s. Single-handedly, this is a man who was outraged that the cars that were built in the United States was not as safe as they could be, that companies in Detroit were putting profits above our safety. And he single-handedly, through his advocacy, through the books that he wrote, through his outrage, changed the auto industry in the United States. He was a Princeton graduate, and he came and spoke, he spoke to us on my very, very first day away from home at university. And one of the messages that he gave, one of the messages that the president of the university gave, is that we were lucky to be at Princeton, and that we needed to think about how we could give back. And I would say that everybody in this room is lucky to be here, and we all need to think about how we can give back. And there are so many ways to do it. It doesn't have to be something that's difficult. Each one of you has interests. I mean, if you love art, and you love kids, maybe you can work with disabled children who can get therapy through art. I mean, there are just a ton of different ways that one can serve the public. I would add that now Princeton's motto is no longer Princeton in the Nation's Service. It is Princeton in the Nation and the World's Service, which is something that went right to my interests. I've always been interested in foreign policy, always been interested in travel and so forth. And so pretty early on, I knew I wanted a career working at the State Department for the U.S. government, trying to advance our foreign policy. And one of the things that I realized fairly early on is that while the Secretary of State up here may be working on the big foreign policy issues of the day, and the rest of us have our roles in making those foreign policy initiatives happen. But Much more of what we do is sort of day-to-day, helping with programming. Here, for example, in Armenia, USAID has many programs. Other parts of the embassy have programs to help advance democracy here, help advance Armenia's economic prosperity and security. And so we work on a much more modest scale than perhaps you see in the news and things that the Secretary of State does. We work on a much more modest scale, but I like to think that we make a real difference. And so and that's one of the things that has been most important to me in my career. That on the one hand, we work on the big policy issues, hoping for that big breakthrough on Turkey, Armenia, or Nagorno-Karabakh, but we also work day to day with people here in Yerevan, with people in the regions, and try to make a difference in their lives. And frankly, if I think I've touched somebody during the day, if I have somehow perhaps set a good example, as we talked about in the beginning of my remarks, I think that's a good day. Because not all of us are going to win the Nobel Peace Prize, not all of us are going to have the big time initiatives, but I think each one of us can make a difference in our neighbors' lives and in those around us. And so that's kind of what motivates me. I think public service is a privilege. It's a privilege for me because I've been given so much in my life, and it's a way for me to give back not only to my own country, the United States, but also to every country that I'm posted to. One thing I would like to also say on a very personal note is that some of you may be thinking, well, that's fine for the ambassador to say. She is an American from a wealthy country and no doubt comes from a very privileged background. And I do believe that I'm from a very privileged background and that much has been given to me. But what I would say is that my parents and I immigrated to the United States when I was 3 years old, and we had no money. In fact, my mother still talks about how in the early days of coming to the United States, we had one car, and we lived in the country. You needed to drive around to get places. My father was paid once a month, and at the end of the month, they would have maybe $5, which is not a lot of money. And whoever had the car got the wallet with the $5, because that was the person that in an emergency would need that $5 to get gas or to buy a loaf of bread or something like that. My parents, however, were hard workers, believed in education, and they really instilled that in me. And so I was able to get a scholarship to Princeton University, which is pretty remarkable. And there had access to some of the best minds in the United States and frankly in the world, because it's a magnet for all sorts of people. And that really influenced everything that I've done since then. And so I would just say that I know not all of our circumstances are the same, but I think that no matter who we are, there's a capacity to help other people through some form of public service, and that it's an important thing to do. The last thing I would say is that recently I read an article in the Washington Post about volunteering, and what it said was that this is actually apparently they've done a scientific study on this, and people who have as part of their lives volunteer, help other people, whatever that activity is, generally are in better health and are happier than people that don't. And so I guess my last pitch on public service, whether it's volunteering, whether it's working for your government, whether it's some other form of public service, is that in helping other people, you're actually helping yourself. You're making yourself healthier, you're making yourself happier, and of course you're improving your community. So that's my pitch on thinking about public service in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador.